America is irrevocably divided. Our democracy right now is hanging by a thread, literally.
Our politics have become so polarized and so damaging, we can't get anything done to reset the thing.
We're gathered together in the heart of our nation's capital for one very basic and simple reason: to save our democracy.
Party, it will become something unrecognizable, more so than it already is.
Trump, in one respect, is an epiphenomenon. He's a result of something else that's been happening that's much bigger. The problem is what led to Trump and Trumpism.
There is such a thing as fake news. It's called propaganda and disinformation. Donald Trump could carry out the manipulation of the people who never really watch legitimate news. You can literally frame the mindset of an entire nation.
Good people can be deceived and their minds can be hacked.
This is probably the most important psychological phenomena that's occurred in this lifetime.
Trump has taken us to a place where one of our parties now is anti-democracy.
The craziest extreme has now taken over the middle.
A pandemic of mass delusion to bring down our entire society.
So much of the coverage of Donald Trump talks about his behavior and his activities, but not really why. It doesn't ask the questions about who this guy really is. And so much of the work I've been trying to do recently is getting into the mental health aspect of Donald Trump, seeing him as a malignant narcissist, seeing him as a gaslighter, somebody who has mental health problems of his own, a personality disorder. And I think finally the media is starting to get there with that kind of coverage, despite trying to normalize him for the last decade almost. A documentary that came out in 2020 was called Unfit: The Psychology of Donald Trump, which really was the first documentary to focus on the mental health aspect of the man. And I'm thrilled to say that a follow-up documentary called Untruths has just been released, and I'm joined now by its director, Dan Partland. Dan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Anthony. Good to be here, and thanks for that great introduction.
Well, I was a huge fan of Unfit when it was first released, because I do take more of an interest in the psychological aspect of Donald Trump. And I do think it must be very frustrating for you, it certainly is for me, that the media won't talk about it. And it's almost as if the psychologists and the psychotherapists and the psychiatrists have been blacklisted from the media when it comes to talking about someone who is so clearly mentally ill. So just from your perspective as a filmmaker, why were you drawn to kind of deal with the psychological aspect of Donald Trump rather than just, the political?
Well, yeah, I think I, along with everybody else in the early days of the Trump administration, was just aghast at what we were seeing on the news every night. And there was something wholly unsatisfying about watching the news. I think we were all consuming more news than ever before. Print media, television media, cable news, radio, just endlessly consuming the scandal of the day. But that was the problem. The 24-hour news cycle was consumed by the scandal of the day, and it was providing tons of coverage and very little insight. And so the effort, what led to Unfit, was really taking a step back and saying, what are people not saying? Because there is an unmistakable sameness to these scandals, to these news stories. How come nobody is talking about the sameness? And what the sameness is evidently, abundantly clear once you take time to recognize it, is the psychology of Donald Trump himself. That is what was, there's nothing in common, with the different cruelties of the firing offenses or of the situation at the separating families at the border or the Muslim ban is divisive in the same way. There's a sort of pattern to his malignancy that we now call malignant narcissism. So the effort in Unfit was really to look at his psychology. The effort in Untruth is really to go in a different direction, because it's quite obvious that at this point, his psychology is not going to change. That's beside the point. The real persistent question, I think, for the society to deal with is the psychology of Trumpism. What is the psychological underpinning that is leading to people finding this malignant narcissist an appealing political figure?
And Untruth has mental health professionals, you interview them, you talk to behaviorists and people going on the record with eye-opening discussion, analysis, examination of the false narratives, the untruths, the disinformation. And this is something that, again, you could literally make films every week about this. I mean, just in the last 24 hours, he has posted enough and said enough stuff that is so crazy that it doesn't fit into it shouldn't really fit into the box of normalcy. It is extreme. And it's not just political extremism. You can tell, you don't have to be a psychiatrist to tell that he is mentally ill. And it's almost like it's the elephant in the room, isn't it? With the media not mentioning it and everybody just playing along, when fascism shows up in November and says, okay, here I am, as we've seen with despots of history, several of us, you included, are not going to be surprised, but a large proportion of the voters and indeed the media, maybe they will.
Well, so there's a lot of different things baked into your point there. Number one, and you alluded to this before, is that the news media is, for the most part, there's an embargo on talking about the mental health of a political candidate. This is a kind of antiquated rule in the APA, the American Association of Psychiatrists Association, which is called the Goldwater Rule, and it's because of a lot of poorly applied science that happened back in the 60s. I do think it's very important to not politicize mental health, and that's why it's a very sensitive conversation. But obviously, the things that we're talking about with Donald Trump, these are not things that were discovered in a clinical environment, told in confidence with a therapist. These are things that are on the news. This is about his public behavior that everyone sees. And I think it would be foolish to not gather the perspective and insights of people who have studied this personality type very carefully. But, what you're talking about, though, it always leads me to the bigger question of why. Why are people caught up in his thrall, despite the abundant evidence that he has got some mental incapacity? And I think what the film really attempts to do, that's quite a difficult task to unpack all of that. But one of the critical things, and it really is a launching off point for the film, is just to understand the study of authoritarianism itself. The idea is that authoritarianism is a latent trait, perhaps in all of us. There is something that is attractive and appealing about a strong and certain leader who is going to go out and isn't going to take no for an answer and is going to do exactly the thing that you emotionally feel needs to be done. And so Trump has activated the authoritarianism in a lot of people. And once somebody has done that, they can make a real bond with their audience, with their followers, because he becomes the one person who's really giving voice, who is saying the unsayable, giving voice to the thing that I have felt in my heart. And look at him. He's the great man. And that validates my feeling. The problem with it is that even though the emotion may be right, the solution is completely ill-considered because it's addressing an emotional need and not actually addressing the problem. Examples being the border crisis or the Muslim ban. When Trump declared we need a Muslim ban, that was after a Muslim had shot up a nightclub, right? That felt good. That felt right. Like, why are we letting this happen? Why are we letting these people into the country? But a careful analysis of the problem will tell you in a second that way more of those kind of mass shootings are happening from homegrown Americans shooting at each other, and that the population of Muslims who've been let into the country, there's no correlation between that and acts of violence in general on the American population. So it leads you to an emotional satisfaction that somebody's going to do something, but ultimately he has ill-considered solutions.
You can apply that logic, though, to all of his policies. And that's what's so frustrating, is that, to me, his supporters, they're like turkeys voting for Thanksgiving, because there's actually nothing in his platform pledges that are going to help them. And a lot of these people have never come into contact with immigrants. They've just been told that they're bad hombres. And this is the problem, isn't it? That it's intangible. The whole thing is a sales pitch. And when it comes to him winning the presidency again, if that were to happen, they are not going to benefit to the tune of any of this stuff.
Well, it's not true that he doesn't give them anything for their support. It's true that what he gives them is intangible. It's true that what he gives them is not about policy. What he gives them turns out to be something that is way more important. And this is what those of us who see the problem need to really deal with. What he gives them is their pride and their dignity and their status in the culture. And that turns out to be way more important to people. And when you look at the history of ethno-nationalist movements, they all have this character. The ethno-nationalist leader is not promising people they're going to actually do anything for their material condition. That's why they're preaching ethno-nationalism. They're saying, we're going to lift you up by virtue of your birthright. You don't have to do anything to have a higher status, and we're not going to do anything for you either. What we're going to do is we're going to shove down everybody else, and that is going to raise your status. And so policy is not the issue. The issue is pride, status, authority in the culture. And that is nectar. People need that if they're feeling aggrieved.
And that plays into their argument that America is not a democracy and has never been a democracy. And they push this narrative that it's a constitutional republic, and so the word democracy has now only been associated with Democrats. Similar meaning anyway. And it's pulled, as we become more polarized, it seems to have pulled a lot of the MAGA Republicans away from the idea of even wanting a modern democracy.
I think, the communication is happening in a series of, dog whistles and, coded communication. But I think it is safe to say at this point that democracy is not really important to this crowd. They do understand that if certain things were left to a true democratic process, that they wouldn't break their way. Right. And so when you're that frustrated that you're not able to enact your vision of the country, that you're completely fine denying majorities their fairly elected vision of the country, whether it's in a presidential election or whether it's for, reproductive rights. We're okay with getting what we want done, even if it disenfranchises our friends and neighbors. That's anti-democratic at its core.
And the strong man, I hadn't really thought of it like this before, but it does really play into a lot of traditional American culture. The machismo, the testosterone, the guy, and, keeping women at home, or women only being for childbearing and child rearing. And we're hearing so much of this rhetoric now coming out of this Christian nationalist movement baked into Project 2025, which is effectively Trump's platform. That again in the film is something that you talk about. Do you think that people understand the significance of Project 2025 and the idea that it's, as Kamala Harris says, can you believe they actually wrote this stuff down? It's all there, 920 pages.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that it's 920 some pages of dense policy discussion, I think that's part of why they felt very comfortable publishing it, because they were making a decision that probably nobody was going to sit down and read it, or read it well enough, or would just, or it's hard to rebut something like that. It's too complex. I think that it's a good first step is that the public has begun to, Project 2025 has become a buzzword, that they don't really know what's in it, but they know that there's some sinister stuff in it. Well, there's a lot of sinister stuff in it. I mean, we talk about some of it in the film, but obviously it's a dense policy document. Mostly the thing to be, concerned about is that it is, by their own description, a plan to sort of weaponize their version of conservatism against the rest of the country. That's in the description of what it is. And among the things that they would like to do is basically to remove the entire technocratic professional level of the United States government, meaning the non-political appointees, the people who actually keep the government running from, one administration to the next, would be tens of thousands of them would be eliminated. Foreign policy apparatus around the globe would be eliminated, and Trump-appointed cronies put into all of those places, really with the intention of corruption. That is the intention, whether it's personal wealth gathering for Trump and his cronies, or whether it's just more run-of-the-mill corruption of pushing through their policy agenda without the need of Democratic support from the Congress or elsewhere.
But that's what makes this the ultimate confidence trick, which Trump is very good at, right? The bait and switch. He's effectively saying, I'm going to do away with the deep state, and then he's just going to build his own deep state.
Absolutely. And I think, the other psychological principle, and we talked a little bit about this in the first film about Trump, is that it's always projection with him. There's pretty much, if you want to know what he's up to or what he's worried about, listen to what he's accusing the other side of. That's really his goal. And the principle with projection, psychologically, is that people do it unconsciously. And they do it because they have to get rid of it. They're holding on to some guilt.
It's like an exorcism.
That's right. There's something they aren't saying that isn't being said that is actually driving them. And so it's on their mind as they're criticizing, in Trump's case, as he's criticizing his opponent. And so, you got to ask questions when you say this guy is too old. He's too old. He can't think clearly. That was what Trump was saying. Well, I think you should ask yourself if Trump is worrying about that himself. Is Hillary Clinton on drugs? Is she taking drugs? Well, nobody thought Hillary Clinton was on drugs. Maybe I'm not alleging anything. I have no knowledge of anything. I'm just saying maybe Don was needing some extra caffeination or something, and he was nervous about it. I don't think he's a drug user, but you never know. Adderall is very effective. So, yeah, I think that there's a lot to be learned from Trump and what he's saying. But again, the focus of this film is more to have a compassionate look at Trump's followers, because it's very important to me. It's fine to make fun of Donald Trump if that's what you feel like you're doing. He's a public figure. He's a big boy. He can take it. I think having a laugh at Trump's expense is something that even a lot of Trump followers enjoy doing. He's kind of an outrageous character. But I don't really want to have a laugh at the expense of his followers. This is 60 million people, right? 60 million people voted for him the second time after they already knew what was going on. So we have to look at that as a psychological phenomenon. 60 million people, it can't be written off as bad apples. They can't be written off as, as all just being duped. We have to accept the fact that there is something in the water, for lack of a better way of putting it. There's something at work in the psychology of our society that is making the ground fertile for authoritarian strongmen like Trump, because it's happening in the United States and it's happening around the world.
But it can be explained by psychiatrists and psychologists, as you explain in the film. This isn't an unknown quantity. It's not something where people are like, I just don't understand. What are they seeing him? It's like, well, watch the documentary, read the books, listen to the people that know, because they do this day in, day out. And so many of the psychiatrists who bring their analysis to this, they see this type of psychopathy in prisons and with patients every day. And they recognize that he is just another criminal with serious mental health impairments. And yet, because he's won the presidency and was on The Apprentice, that has kind of normalized him as a public figure when he really should be in a straitjacket in a secure unit.
Well, yes, I think that the scholars in the film give a lot of insight into into this phenomenon of why people are drawn to authoritarians. The one thing, though, that I think is important to note is that goes back to my theme of not being able to pin it all on Trump, is because there have always been guys like Trump. Throughout history, they come up. People just like that were also, making a claim in 2008 when Obama was elected, or in 2000 with George W. Bush. There were people on the presidential ticket, outliers who were trying to get nominations. Lyndon LaRouche. There was we've had every kind of nonsense in the United States politics. That's the good of it. That's the fun of it. All comers, let them compete on the, on the big stage for the marketplace of ideas. But the question that we have to understand if we want to get ahead of this ever is what changed because those kind of characters in the past were always relegated to the fringes. They were quickly set aside. That was not the direction that the American people wanted to go. They wanted a more sober, thoughtful leadership. And right now they don't. And until we can understand why that is, I think we're going to be stuck in this cycle, because I don't think, regardless of the outcome in November, I don't think this chapter is over.
Well, he's certainly not going to go quietly if he loses. And Trumpism, you could argue, it's a pox, and it's, half the country's already caught it. And his surrogates are not going to go quietly either. So he has infiltrated the Republican Party to the point that it bears no resemblance even to, the Bush Republican Party. But he did that with every intention. I mean, putting Lara Trump in at the RNC. I mean, it's almost like he wants to take the Trump organization as a family business and just, rebrand America LLC.
I think he does, and I think that's the kind of ultimate place the film tries to sort of walk you through what is happening in the United States and around the world, and this certainly is a pattern. I mean, I think Trump would like to be an oligarch. I think he is trying to position himself as such. He's envious of oligarchs around the world. Vladimir Putin is, people don't really know, but it's theorized probably the richest person on the planet, when you take into consideration all the holdings, and then has created this class of oligarchs just under him, and that's a very, very powerful construction. Now, in this day and age, we also have the rise of really world-changing wealth in the hands of a lot of tech people. Just the way the economy has developed, it has created these opportunities where we just have a class of people who can mobilize, spend enough money to really put policies in place around the globe that really are going to affect all of us. And I think that Trump is desperate to be in that club, eager to do favors for that club and to help that to happen, whether it's Vladimir Putin or whether it's, Saudi Arabian princes or Elon Musk.
Well, he certainly regrets slagging off Teslas and electric vehicles and is having to walk that back, even offering Elon Musk a job in his administration involving in dealing with purchasing and waste. And Musk has accepted. And that is the oligarchy, isn't it? Creeping in to American governance.
And it's good business for both of them. I mean, who with the first grade knowledge of business could understand that it made every sense in the world for Trump if he was going to get $45 million was what was pledged, $45 million a month from Elon Musk, to adapt any positions he had to make sure that would happen. And it easily made business sense for Elon Musk to offer $45 million a month if he could have the President of the United States in his back pocket. That's how oligarchy happens.
The crazy thing is that no one seems to be trying to hide any of this stuff. It's all done in plain sight. And even, the coup and the insurrection, all in plain sight. And pretty much everybody involved in Trump's orbit now is either in prison or serving a probation sentence, or they've been caught for colluding with Russians. I mean, he really is the last man standing, and the legal cases haven't quite caught up with him ahead of the election. But certainly immediately after the election, he's due to be sentenced. I mean, this is a very serious thing. Do you think that him being a felon is going to affect the vote in any way?
It doesn't seem like it. I think, listen, yeah, you said all of the people in his orbit who are in jail and stuff like that. Certainly. I mean, there are no former cabinet members who are endorsing him. A lot of them are endorsing Kamala Harris. Even the ones that aren't endorsing Kamala Harris mostly have come out, either written books or come out in some way on the record to say that they think electing Donald Trump would be a grave threat to the future of the country. And yet, there still is an endless stream of sycophants who would be happy to play that role. Even though Mike Pence's life was threatened, there's always going to be somebody who is happy to play that role. And that's it's a corrupt mindset, willing to make that kind of trade-off, which is, I suspect, what people at the highest levels of government who are participating with Trump are doing. But I think that in terms of the rank and file following, I think the equation is a little bit different, and I think it is more psychological. If you think about Trump as a malignant narcissist, he gets a narcissistic high off
sadism,
of power.
Almost, isn't it?
It is. Sadism is one of the attributes under the header of malignant narcissism. But if you think, what is the ultimate narcissistic high? I mean, what could be more powerful and thrilling than convincing people, millions of people, to believe what you say over their lying eyes? Right? I mean, that is the ultimate act of domination on his part in getting them to submit to his authority. If he can tell everybody who saw everything in broad daylight that something they saw was not true, they have to rely on him. That's his ultimate high and the ultimate manifestation of his contempt for his followers. I am sure Donald Trump holds his followers in contempt for their foolishness, for their stupidity in following him, right? That's the complicated psychology of it. He is out to dominate them. He's out to trick them because he loves their adulation. He's willing to do anything for it. But the more they give it in the face of all evidence to the contrary, the more they are lessened in his own estimation.
Well, he did let slip, I don't care about you, I just want your votes. And the truth, he often says the quiet parts out loud. And that is, I think, as he's on the ropes now, he's becoming more and more unhinged in that area. I just want to ask you, though, about just regarding his followers. How do we get them to watch this documentary? Because they need to see this. And when I watched it last night, it is the most compelling 90 minutes of the American story, the modern American story, starting with the insurrection effectively and kind of bringing us up to date with where we're at. It's a terrifying anthology of events when they're all put together in one program, as you've done. And I thought to myself, well, if MAGA Republicans who are brainwashed, who are suffering Trump contagion syndrome, were to watch this, maybe they might be like, yeah, that's quite a lot, isn't it?
Well, thank you for saying all that. Listen, I think the dig on these films, on this film and other films that wade into this political space, is that they're always dinged for sort of preaching to the converted. I think this is not I think this is a kind of a straw man argument about what films really can do and should do. Absolutely, there was an intended audience for this film, which does include aiming it sort of squarely at the audience that is most confounding to me, which are a lot of very sober, smart, grounded Republicans who see the problem of Trump and are going to vote for him anyway because they just like Republican politics so much. That's the mindset that I am most frustrated by. People who are fully in his thrall, that's a different question. So when you're thinking about where this film can be effective, I do think people who are wobbling, people who are in the middle, people who just feel very loyal to conservative politics, but are uncomfortable with all kinds of things about Trump, I do think they would watch this film, and I do think it would reach them. I think but what's that percentage? 2.5 to 5%, maybe, for everyone else who's just sort of firmly in Trump's camp, I suspect that they won't watch it, and if they did, they would probably find a way to let it roll off of them. Whether any of it would get through, I don't know. But I don't think that's really the value of a film like this. The value of a film like this, it's not to preach to the converted, but it is to activate people, the open-minded, right? It is to move the conversation, to put together a framework that lets people talk about certain issues in the sort of maelstrom of noise that the political process is creating, to focus in on a few issues and give people a framework for talking about it, and then letting that spread out, that it goes out into other media. I mean, what we found with Unfit was, as much as there was an embargo, there was a prohibition on speaking about the mental health of a political candidate at most of the major news outlets. Once the film came out and people saw it, and they saw that it was not an outrageous, hit job, that it was science, and that it was thoughtful, and that it was fair, articles started popping up all over the place about the psychological side of it, about Trump's mental health, and feeling comfortable to use that language because they had seen that language used and modeled by real experts who were creating that framework for talking about the problem.
The film is called Untruth, the Psychology of Trumpism. It's the follow-up to Unfit, and both are available, but certainly the new movie you can download from Apple or from YouTube or wherever you get your movies from. For now, Dan Partland, congratulations on the documentary, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Anthony. It was a pleasure.
I'm Anthony Davis. You can find me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel and podcast, on Wednesdays co-hosting Uncovered, and on Sunday on The Weekend Show with MeidasTouch.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.